Hey, everybody, and good evening to you. Almost good morning. I'm Chief Meteorologist Leslie Hudson for My Radar, and joining me shotgun is meteorologist Stefanie Lauber. We're with you here through the duration, you guys, of landfall, which we estimate to be within the next several hours, maybe as soon as 2 to 3 hours from now. We will get an official call from the National Hurricane Center, and there's several things to update you about and what's been going on. And as we talked about a little bit in the previous live update that we did, at this point forward, it's not so much a forecasting event as it is a nowcasting event, meaning we'll be tracking storms, storm surge, tornadoes, and the wind that will be coming in with this hurricane as we head into these next several hours. So off of the screen there, you can see, of course, a live look at the radar. We have 5 live radar scans in the area, and I'm going to zoom in here quickly just to give you a quick look here and take a look at some of the particulars with the reflectivity, which is a good indication of just how much the rain rates are and what the folks are getting here just south of Lake Charles. You can see the band there. Let me grab the pointer because it is really close. Stefanie and I were just talking about this just before we came on. The outer bands there really, really close now to the coastline of Louisiana. So again, Lake Charles here, this is the official locator. The Hurricane Center has been using about 75 miles south. Of course, once it crosses the plain, it has to cross right about in there where that little dot is in the eye. And once it officially crosses over that plain of land in Louisiana, we'll get an official call from the National Hurricane Center. So it's really close, and I do think we'll see this probably in landfall range somewhere in between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. or close to that for sure. So this is the time where things are going to significantly deteriorate in this area, and very quickly it's going to get very life-threatening with that storm surge. So as I pull in here, it's interesting to note I was taking a volume scan just a couple minutes ago. So there was not a cloud deck, and it looks like, and I apologize, it looks like my Wi-Fi is not doing a great job here. So we'll try and stick with this for a second. If it doesn't improve, I'm going to toss it over to Stefanie and switch routers and see if I can get a better picture for you. But I wanted to point out that the cloud tops here, the last time we were talking to you guys, were about 30,000 feet in the atmosphere. Now we're seeing some of those tops 60,000 because we're right at the outer peripheral edge of that eye and that eye wall where the highest cloud tops are. So in excess of 60,000 feet in the atmosphere, some pretty heavy duty stuff. And again, indications of what is going to be an extremely long night for the folks in Louisiana. So the actual eye itself, if we do a rudimentary, and again, this is kind of unofficial look here, but you can see the eye itself is roughly about 20, officially from the National Hurricane Center, it's about 28 to 30 miles across, and my pointer just got stuck. So you get an effect there. So it's about 30 miles across. It is a large eye. It is a large circulation, and the tropical storm force winds extend out about 205 miles from the center. So on either side of that center, the eye, we're talking about 400 miles in total. Big major landscape, a huge chunk of geography is being impacted, and it still looks like my Wi-Fi is not great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and toss it back to Stefanie, and Matt, if you will take her poll, then I'm going to try and switch my router or switch my Wi-Fi and get cleaner pictures with every second.
And Leslie will be back with us in a moment, as you heard. Just getting things in here from the latest advisory. Still seeing significant strengthening over the past couple of hours with this storm. You see behind me the latest stats on Laura. We have our maximum sustained winds at 150 miles per hour, but take a look at this, gusting to 184 miles per hour. And as Leslie was talking about that, some of the most severe winds and conditions will be in that eye wall surrounding the center. But gusting to 184 miles per hour, that's well above where that Category 5 range is. So even though the storm itself has maximum sustained winds in that Category 4 range, that's not to say that the gusts or not sustained winds aren't more intense as we see this storm continue to move onshore. And so that's kind of the condition that we're dealing with now. Also notable, if you've been watching some of these lives with us, you'll notice that the pressure Before, when we were talking with myself and Mike earlier around 5 p.m. Eastern time, that pressure was about 10 clicks higher. So as the pressure drops, remember this is low pressure, so as the storm becomes more intense, that pressure begins to come down. That's a sign that we've seen continued intensification as Laura has made its close approach to the coast here. So now what I'm going to do is jump into the My Radar app here, and of course we love to invite you guys to track along with us in our radar feature, looking out at a big picture over the southern U.S., mostly the southeastern, but including some parts of Texas as well. It's almost a perfect circular feature here on the radar, and those bright reds and oranges showing you where the most intense thunderstorms are, and that yellow extends out a good ways into Louisiana, a lot of that making its way onshore already. So we've seen some strong storms coming through. We're going to talk to our storm chaser Aaron Jajac here in a moment, but we've had some reports from him where the winds are beginning to pick up, and if you saw our interview with him earlier, beautiful sunset there. I'm afraid the landscape is going to look different as we head into the morning hours, see daylight and eventually sunrise coming through. We're going to see some damage there through the storm because at this point it's such a formidable, potent storm at Category 4 out of 5 categories here. We're dealing with a very intense system that's making its way onshore here. So that's why it was very important for folks to evacuate and get out of this area because words from the National Hurricane Center, quote, unsurvivable storm surge damage, end quote. So it's some strong language there coming from them, and it's not an exaggeration of those conditions to be expected. So something very impressive to note there. And I'm hearing in what we are going to next. Matt is in my ear here, so we're getting an update. All right, we are going to go now to our storm chaser, Aaron Jajac, who is located in Sulphur, Louisiana. We'll get an update on his exact location here in a moment, but I want to bring him in and get some information on what the conditions are where he is. Mind you, that's near Lake Charles, and that's very close to the coastline here and where we expect the center of Laura to then come on shore. So, Aaron, thanks for joining us. How are you doing out there?
Hey, it's getting pretty windy and rainy now. As you can see, I think the camera's a little messed up from all the rain, but we are starting to get the outer edges of Hurricane Laura here now are impacting this area, and I suspect it's going to just continue to deteriorate through the night here.
Intensity to us with that band that came through.
Sorry, what can you say? What about that band?
That we were tracking on radar, and as Leslie just said, there was a stronger band that just came through. Can you describe to us what that was like, how intense it was where you are?
Yeah, I would say, the winds, it was still pretty gentle for what's to come. I would say it's probably tropical storm force winds, probably 35 to 45 mile per hour there, maybe a little more, probably 45, I'd say, around in there. Just the gusts there briefly, and then it's died down, so it's going back and forth between those stronger gusts as a band comes through, and then just kind of, your steady probably 15 to 20 mile per hour winds.
And your location where you are you still in Sulphur, Louisiana?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm still in Sulphur. It looks like I should be able to get into the eye just by staying here in Sulphur.
Yeah, and we can see conditions looking to get kind of hairy out there where you are in your background. What's kind of going on there on the ground? Have you seen any folks out, other chasers maybe? And have you seen law enforcement kind of patrolling the area now that we're getting into the busy time here, so to speak?
No, I was seeing some law enforcement earlier driving around here. That was probably like at sunset a couple hours ago. But ever since then, now I haven't seen any cars driving around. I think everyone's hunkered down pretty much here. There's some folks here that are at this hotel that I'm at. They're out front, just checking things out, seeing underneath the canopy. But for the most part, I don't see anyone out. We still have electricity and all that. So, I expect we'll probably lose electricity though here in the next 2 hours or so, maybe a little longer. Maybe it won't be until the eye wall comes ashore, because I'm sure things are pretty well built here. That you look at the power poles here, they're really big, structurally sound power poles that can survive really strong winds. So maybe it'll take until those eye wall winds come ashore, 100 mile per hour plus sustained winds come ashore, that we won't lose power until then. You guys still have me there?
Aaron, I'm sorry, it looks like I've lost my audio with you here for a moment. We're going to try to get that back on track here in just a moment.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
And those conditions that you're in over there, it's going to be a long night for you out on the coastline there, and we're thinking of you out there. Please stay safe. And thank you for taking the time to chat with us. Again, I'm sorry if I cut you off. We're having some audio issues getting through to you here. But what I want to do now is head back to our app and kind of talk about some of the conditions that we've seen with these bands rolling on through. Of course, you saw Aaron there hanging out not too far from the coastline, and we do expect some pretty hefty surf, because we are now going in, the tide is coming in, and we're getting to that time where we could see a strong storm surge anywhere in the neighborhood from 15 to 20 feet at the coastline as the bird flies from Aaron's location. And now I want to take you to some video we have. We got some impressive imagery coming in, a 3D scan of Hurricane Laura that we'd like to pop up on the screen here. Matt, if you could take that full screen, and we'll talk a little bit about imagery. It's very telling of the power that we have. That has rapidly intensified into the overnight last night into today. We are going from a Category 1 to a Category 4 storm in a very short period of time. So what you're seeing up there, those intense colors, the reds, oranges, and that dark gray, black color, showing the coldest cloud tops, the most intensification and convection with these storms. And as we rotate around, you can see the texture on this. This was taken from earlier, and it just is very telling to just the sheer power of this system as it's made its way across those warm Gulf of Mexico waters. And of course, we like to compare this to a heat engine. It's the most natural example of the Carnot cycle, if we have any physics nerds out there who understand that. And it just takes in that fuel from the Gulf of Mexico. That air rises, cools, condenses, and then that latent heat exchange just gets exhausted out from the top of the storm. And yeah, we just have a powerful, powerful system there. It looks like we have our chief meteorologist, Leslie Hudson, back on the scene here. So we're going to try to bring her back in and see if we can have her take back over with this system. I know we've got some very strong pans coming ashore, so we're going to help guide you through this here. So Leslie, I can't hear you, but I think we got you back here, so take it away.
I can kind of hear you too, Stefanie, and I think we are all a victim of the audio gremlins tonight. So hopefully we'll get Aaron back, and we're certainly going to be here for the next several hours. So we'll get Aaron back into one of our other live shots, and I think you can hear me. I do hear myself. I hear a terrible echo, so I think we're okay. So maybe Matt and Stefanie can figure out their audio part, and then we can talk a little bit here about some of the graphics. So what I have up right now is the storm relative velocity, and what you see there is a product that we use to detect early detection of rotation in thunderstorms. And of course, there are plenty of them here with a massive rotating hurricane like Laura getting oh so close to land, and you can see several cases where there could be some rotation. I'm going to do just one volume scan here. Now this is going to be in the ocean. Whoops, it did it again. So we have a bug in our system here. When I go into a volume scan mode, it automatically just pops back over to reflectivity, but I want it in velocity mode so we can take a look. So we'll take a little look-see here. Well, it did it again. So I will do a volume scan right on the north side of the eye, and then we'll pop this over to velocity and see if we see anything. Well, so there's that classic red and green the green going towards the radar, the red going away, and again an indication of rotation, a classic example of rotating onshore flow with a hurricane that is very close to making landfall. I'm going to scoot this around and see. We actually could pick up a couplet on our last live. So, I think I see one. Let me check here. I got to tilt the camera and see if I can actually see it a little better. I don't see. So what we would see, what we're looking for is the red actually inside that green. Let me grab the blue arrow, our handy dandy arrow, which will help point out what I'm trying to show you. So in here, we would be looking for what's called a couplet, and it would be a red marker, if you will, that the radar picks up when it does a scan. And as Stefanie has mentioned before, oftentimes when we get these tornado or tornadic cells that are creating friction as they're getting closer or impacting land, they don't last for very long. They're brief spin-ups. You have to remember these thunderstorms in the Gulf of Mexico are all rotating counterclockwise in this larger circulation of Laura. And so when they come on shore, obviously land doesn't move, but these storms are moving, and there's a clash in inertia, if you will. And that's where we sometimes can see these spin-ups of these tornadoes. So I'm going to just kind of pivot this around, see if I see anything interesting. And not just yet, but again, I'm in the ocean here. We have a couple here on land. We'll go quickly look over here. I don't see anything over here, but let's go back to reflectivity, because I want to talk a little bit about this eye, which is so impressive and so intimidating. If you're in this area of the country, you have family that lives here. We've heard a lot of people, by the way, on our social media pages that have family that lives here, and we have heard some reports of people that have not evacuated in these mandatory evacuation zones. And of course, now it's too late. The winds are already in excess of tropical storm strength in many parts of this area, and it's just too dangerous for the crews to come and get you. So if you likely cannot hear me, I'm sure there's no power in this area of Louisiana, but people that have family that are here, their family unfortunately cannot be rescued because it's too dangerous for crews to go out. So hopefully people are not in this area. They have heeded the advice from the local officials and have evacuated. And it looks like I lost WSI. So give me a second. I don't even know if you can still hear me. I see WSI, but it got bumped out. So hang on one second. I'm going to reconnect through a remote server that is going to do a remote login. There, it looks like I'm back. Goodness, we are having all kinds of problems. Okay, so let me hear a Slack call. Nope, that's not me. Okay, so here's a look at the current wind gusts, you guys, and there's a couple of things that jump out at me besides this incredible vibrant infrared imagery. But what you'll see here is these are live wind gusts. So you can see in the neighborhood of 30 miles an hour along many areas. Lake Charles, which is really the kind of entry point, if you will, or we think is going to be probably the closest city that will get the worst impacts from the winds from Laura. And the winds there are currently 57.5 miles an hour and in the range of 30 to 35 over into the west side there. So again, exponentially increasing with landfall very close. Let me get my ruler out and let's take a look and see how far this is from land. So again, this is rudimentary. This is not a exact science by any means, but if I take this up, well, first we'll do it here. So we're technically about 40 miles from land, it looks, give or take, maybe 45, because I know I don't have this perfectly centered. And then we're about 62, 63 miles from Lake Charles, and the official last locator from the National Hurricane Center was around 70 miles. So that's about right, you guys. So I think we are within a few hours here of landfall, probably in the neighborhood of 2, 3, maybe even 4 this morning. It depends if it slows just a bit before it heads off towards the north. And we're already seeing, by the way, Laura being impacted from this ridge of high pressure that's been steering it. I'm going to show you the water vapor in just a second, but now we're starting to see more of a pull towards the north, which the National Hurricane Center, their modeling has done a fantastic job, really kind of honing in on the exact location of the landfall. And it looks like this northern flow will continue for about 24 hours or so, and then we're going to see a rapid turn towards the right or towards the northeast, and then moving quickly off the mid-Atlantic states after that. And by the way, National Hurricane Center thinks there might be some type of extratropical feature that remnant Laura will kind of reorganize into an extratropical low briefly before it gets into the northern latitudes, and you'll see that here in just a second. So winds 150 miles an hour sustained, north-northwest movement at 15. Pressure 938, that's up 1 millibar from the last update we got from the Hurricane Center. We get updates now, by the way, every hour because it's so close to landfall. We get not a new path, but we get new winds and new pressure readings and new coordinates. So there's the official path. And as you can see, let me pull this out just a little bit more. And notice how the winds go up Sunday and Monday. This is just kind of an incidental fact to what's going to be going on that will not be impacting the U.S. at all, but there is some indications that this might become an extratropical low or try to maintain some type of organization before it gets swept up near Nova Scotia. So just an interesting side note, by the way. Okay, so let's see. The next map that you can see here, of course, is the hurricane watches and warnings, and that has not changed either. There's been no updates, and we don't expect there to be any updates on the watches and warnings from the National Hurricane Center at this point because we're so close to landfall. Here's a look at that water vapor. So I don't know if Stefanie can hear me, but I'm going to draw real quick, and I'm going to try and toss it back to her, and we'll see what we've got going on. If she can't hear me, then I'll pick it back up. But oh, perfect. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the upper level low, and I know you and Mike were talking about this, and then of course, whoops, off in the distance over here is our ridge. Well, hang on one second. Switch arrows and see if that'll off screen here. I should have widened that scope out a little bit, and then let me try and get rid of this because that's not just that hot button is not supposed to be there. Let me see if I can get rid of this. That might get rid of our arrows. But anyways, okay, well, it's not going to go away. So I apologize for that navigation bar that's over there on the left. But anyway, Steph, I'm going to toss it back over to you, and maybe we can, it's been interesting to see the steering flow. We did this last year. You and I utilized the water vapor a lot when the models did a terrible job trying to forecast what was going on with Dorian, and we were just looking at the upper level patterns to try and figure out, when the turn was going to happen with Dorian, how close it was going to get to the U.S. before it made its turn. But it's interesting to see that this trough has already been interacting so classically with Laura, and then we're going to see that sharp turn towards the right.
Yeah, and that's something we're going to talk about here in a moment. I caught back up with our chief scientist, Sarvesh, so we'll jump into all that with the models here in a second. But what you're seeing here on the water vapor gives that top-down view of the upper third of the atmosphere. So the upper third of where all that weather happens is what you're looking at. The bright colors, it may be obvious to you here, that's the hurricane. That's all the moisture that you see here. But what you're seeing with the orange color and those darker shades of gray and black, that's dry air aloft. So that does a good job of showing you where we have that trough of low pressure that's been very key in helping to keep Laura kind of on its track and away from folks inland with Texas. Unfortunately, the Gulf of Mexico is there, so it's going to move on to somebody. In this case, it looks like it's along the Texas-Louisiana border that we have seen Laura continue to be steered by. But what's interesting is this. So we had some chatter over the weekend with Marco. So it's very interesting that we had two storms approaching the Gulf of Mexico in such a relatively short amount of time. So Marco, thankfully, a more benign storm with that. Low pressure actually helped out with Laura's forecast because low pressure likes low pressure, birds of a feather here. So as Marco began to deteriorate and fall apart, its pressure center kind of chipping back in to that trough and keeping it alive a little bit longer, if I can say that. And that has continued to keep that trough somewhat in place to help direct Laura up into that northern part of the Gulf where we're seeing the path pan out here now. But another big factor was that ridge of high pressure over the Atlantic that has steered both storms into the Gulf of Mexico. Those two systems very key and bringing the system to where it is now. And unfortunately, like I said, the Gulf of Mexico, it likes to play tricks, and we have folks that live all along it. And so unfortunately, we are going to see some devastating effects for folks here along the northwestern edge of the Gulf. But what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit more about these models. We're going to bring in that interview I had with our chief scientist, Sarvesh Garamella, and we were talking about models. For some of you who like to nerd out and talk about these models, something that was interesting with Laura was that as the center was coming off the island of Cuba, it was elongated, and it was somewhat difficult for the models to kind of lock on to that center of circulation. And so the path kept going further and further west, more on the coastline of Texas, and the National Hurricane Center had to account for those changes. And so that definitely went into the modeling aspect of it. But if you'd like to hear more about what goes into it, well, I asked some questions to our chief scientist, and he had some great answers to share with us. So here it is. Joining me now, we have our chief scientist, Sarvesh Garamella, and earlier we were speaking with Mike Linden about kind of the workings that are going on at the National Hurricane Center when it comes to forecasting these massive forces of nature. And so now I wanted to talk to you and pick your brain a little bit about some of the modeling that people look at for guidance when it comes to forecasting these storms. You know, we see spaghetti plots and all those colorful lines get kind of messy, and it can be a bit difficult to understand. So can you help us understand a little bit more about what models are and how we use them?
Totally. So when you look at a spaghetti plot, each of the different lines you see corresponds to how the storm is expected to evolve as output from a various different weather models. So the weather models themselves are fancy computer programs that solve partial differential equations. So they know what the state of the atmosphere is at a given time, and they know how the tendency is going to change the state of the atmosphere, and they march forward in time and have feedbacks and allow for a pretty sophisticated understanding of the physics and chemistry that results in the storm either making landfall or having other behaviors like rapid intensification. But they're really useful tools for understanding the dynamics and intensity and evolution of storms.
Great. And so with that, you know, it's a major help to us. Something that we've been talking about here over the past couple of days is all the kinds of data that go into these models. So over the weekend, we were talking about how the National Weather Service offices have begun supplemental or special soundings in addition to the 2 every day that they normally put out, adding some extra soundings in there to help gather some data. Of course, we've been tracking those hurricane hunter flights into Laura to gather more information. There are buoys and oil rigs out there. Can you give us a little more background on why that data is important and how it helps when we are looking at these models for guidance?
Definitely. So the data that we get from the observational networks help in what we can consider like a predictor corrector framework. So the model will iterate forward in a time step, make a prediction of what it expects the atmosphere to evolve like. We have an observation from the real atmosphere, which is able to nudge the model in the right direction. And so it can account for the things that it got wrong in a particular grid step to nudge it in the right direction, so the eventual prediction that it makes is improved. And so the better quality and the more observations that we have, the improvements in the models have been evident in the last several years.
Excellent, and they are a big help, I know, not just for enthusiasts who are watching. Of course, the folks over at the NHC and meteorologists in general, just really ingesting that kind of information and trying to make sense of that guidance, because that's what it is. It's not set in stone. It's just to help us do a lot of math calculations in a very short amount of time. A lot of times we hear people talking about the Euro or the GFS model, and I feel like a lot of people are either Team Euro or Team GFS, and it may not be quite that simple. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Hurricane Center actually puts out a seasonal verification report every year looking at how it does compare to any individual model. And so it's really hard to beat the consensus that you're deriving from all the different data sources with any given model. There's certainly cases where a particular model might do the best on a particular storm or a particular variable, but the GFS or Euro fanboys out there, those models are really useful for predicting the track of hurricanes, but the Hurricane Center doesn't even use those at all for predicting the intensity. So it's sort of selling yourself short if you don't take into account all of the accessible information and ask questions like, well, if all of the models are agreeing on the track, then I might have some more confidence in suggesting that we have a good understanding of what the track is doing and what are the various variables that are influencing that track. However, if the models are starting to diverge, you can start to pick apart, hey, what is this model picking up on that this other one isn't? And looking at the particular manifestation of a given storm, along with how you know that model to behave over the course of your career as a meteorologist, is how you can start to gain insights and do better than any of the individual models when it comes to a long-term average.
Yep, and I know there's a lot of work going into, when we were at the American Meteorological Society's conference back in January, and there was so much talk about some of the improvements that are coming into models and some new points of data that are eventually, we hope, will be ingested into these models. And we've made a lot of traction with the forecast for the path of these storms, but we're still working on trying to get ahead of the intensity forecast, especially with regards to the problem we've seen with Laura even, is rapid intensification, where we go from Category 1 hurricane to Category 4 top-level storm here in just a short matter of time. So what are your thoughts on that going forward?
So a lot of the improvements that we have seen in hurricane modeling over the last few years have come as a result of the ensemble modeling or the consensus modeling improving, and the very sophisticated techniques that the Hurricane Center is using to put together various models and blend them intelligently to make a better product at the end. We're starting to see some of the similar improvements in the intensity forecasting as well. So if you look at the 2019 hurricane report out of the NHC, they talk about what their specific plans are for the 2020 season, and individual models are also continuing to improve as well. But on top of that, the Hurricane Center's ability to blend these models in a continually improving way is really improving the overall skill of our hurricane forecasts.
And so much more to come. I'm sure Laura will teach us many lessons, and we're not even at the peak of hurricane season yet, so likely more lessons to come from that, hopefully in a less severe way, so to speak. But thank you so much for giving us some of your time, Sarvesh. We'll be continuing to give some more coverage on this, but it's great to get some insight on some of the tools that meteorologists and atmospheric scientists are using to compile these forecasts and get that accuracy even better every time. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it was great to get that insight from Sarvesh to really understand what kind of tools that the NHC is using, and that's something we've been talking about over the past couple of days with the extra soundings and everything that you heard there. Something else that we spoke about after we got off that interview is for our aviation buffs out there, maybe you're visiting from our sister app FlightWise, commercial aviation has seen a downtrend with the pandemic going on, and you may not know that those flights are also critical sources for weather information as they make their trips around the globe. They're recording weather information that then gets put into some of these models, and as you heard him say, that's very critical. As much data as we can get in there, quality data, helps to improve that forecast and helps the meteorologists do all that heavy math in a much shorter time scale. So the fact that we haven't had that will be interesting to see how much that impacts forecasting overall when the National Hurricane Center wraps up their annual report here in about, I guess, another 8 months or so, well after the season. But yeah, Leslie, some interesting information that we got out of Sarvesh there, our chief scientist.
Yeah, he's such a great resource, and I always love to hear him talk because he really does geek out on this stuff, and really there's so much meat on that bone, if you will, to chew on, because this is such a historic event, and we know that there's not been a hurricane of this magnitude in this particular region of Louisiana in a very long time. So unfortunately, yet again, more records in this hurricane season that we know will continue to be a record-breaking season because we've had so many named storms already. So our first major landfall just hours away and right on the cusp of a Category 5, strong Category 4, more than likely at landfall. We don't think it's going to likely get into that Cat 5 threshold. Does not matter at this rate. The level of destruction will be the same. The level of the storm surge will be the same, whether there is a 5-mile-per-hour difference or a 7-mile-per-hour difference, whatever the actual number is. So one of the biggest things that we always try to tell people about is the storm surge. It's the #1 killer that kills the most people that don't get out of harm's way, that don't evacuate. And we talked about how far inland this storm surge is going. We've also talked about the marshlands down in Louisiana. So obviously there is not built-in barriers there in the topography. However, because of the angle and the trajectory of Laura, we are seeing the impacts will likely be felt as far inland as 40 miles. And to give you a frame of reference, Aaron, who is our storm chaser, is in Sulphur, and he's been toggling between Lake Charles and Sulphur, because Lake Charles at this point we do believe is going to be the entry point, the city that will have the direct impacts from the eye. And so that's about 40 miles from the coast. So we're not anticipating a 20-foot or 15-foot storm surge there, obviously, because as you get further away from the Gulf, the impacts, it's like when you pour a big cup of water, you get a huge gush of water at the beginning, and then it exponentially decreases the further out it goes down the table or down the sink or whatever you're doing, if you're trying to make an analogy here. But there is going to be some type of increase in water rise. We've already seen in the Lake Charles area and surrounding areas about a 3-foot surge already, and it's going to continue to go up. I did check the YouTube comments while we were listening to Sarvesh's interview, and someone did ask, when will the storm surge arrive? It's already arrived. It arrives hours before landfall, but it dramatically increases as the storm gets closer. So we've seen a rise of about 3 feet in some areas even more than that, and it's going to exponentially get larger once we get closer to an actual landfall. Some of the estimates, again, 15 feet, and I'll show you that graphically in just a second. So you can see the storm surge warning, and again, the concern how far inland that goes. And by the way, the Hurricane Center in their discussion at 11 p.m. tonight said that folks that live 100 miles inland will have impacts, wind impacts from Laura, not storm surge impacts, but wind. So this is a large hurricane in size, but you have to remember, large size doesn't always equate to strength. In this case, it does. This is a large in diameter size hurricane, but it's also powerful in its scope as well. So there's a 1-2 punch there, unfortunately. So we've been showing this product a lot as well. I'm going to zoom in way closer because some of the areas that we've really been concerned with, we've been mentioning Lake Charles a lot and Cameron, and this is where that 9-foot storm surge is possible in this area, which again, a good analogy is if you're in your house, you're more than likely your first floor is about 10 feet tall, 10 feet high. So if you do the math, you're on the bottom of your dwelling of your home, and you're expecting a 9 to 15-foot storm surge that goes above your roof and into the second floor. And I'll tell you, when I've covered many catastrophic hurricanes over the years, and recently I went to the Bahamas and did Hurricane Dorian coverage, and then I also did Hurricane Michael coverage, and I did Hurricane Irma. But I mention all this because one of the stories that you'll hear survivors tell you often is that they were surprised how fast the water came in and how high it came in. Because the other concern with this storm surge is the tide that is already going to be high around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning here when we could see this actual landfall. So there's the storm surge, and then there's the storm tide. So the surge is the wall of water, the Gulf of Mexico coming in, and then on top of that is the tidal tide. So that can increase another 3, 4, 5 feet in some areas. So that's why there is massive concern in this area, because the timing of the landfall and what that will mean, because we don't even have just the storm surge to worry about, we also have the tidal tides that we have to worry about as well. Down into the boot of Louisiana, looking better for these folks, 1 to 3 feet. I have a graphic where the National Hurricane Center has been great, a new product that they have it's been operational. This is it. And so it's a pretty good guide to indicate that if you're in this region anywhere from the part of Texas, into eastern Texas, all the way back over to Mississippi, which you can expect. So in the Rockport area over in Texas, we'll start there. First 2 to 5 feet. Of course, that is a dangerous surge for sure. Cars can be lofted easily in 3 feet of water or less. You yourself can be swept off your feet in just 18 inches of water, 1.5 feet. So it's a very dangerous storm surge, even at 2 to 5 feet. 6 to 9 feet in the Galveston area. Earlier in the week, we were really concerned that the Galveston Bay area might get the brunt of this high storm surge. And of course, we don't want anyone to get the storm surge. You hate that when we get these big hurricanes in the Gulf because they have nowhere to go. It's like a caged animal. It's got to get released somewhere. And unfortunately, the freedom is the United States for its caged fury. So there is nowhere for it to go. Another question was asked in one of our chats earlier today, could this dissipate or could it turn and move back into the Caribbean? No. Like I said, once we get into the Gulf of Mexico, it's pretty much going into the U.S. or it could go into Mexico. But it's, if it's getting into the central Gulf of Mexico, it is almost without a doubt it's going to be hitting the U.S. land, and as long as it's. Okay, so thank you for telling me that. Actually, let me go back to this. I'm going to show you the graphic. But Matt just said someone asked what storm surge is. So storm surge is what I've been explaining is a wall of water. So let's pretend this is the land in Louisiana. For argument's sake, we'll say Lake Charles. Lake Charles is about 30 miles inland, but just because it's a city or Cameron, it doesn't really matter what city. But this is the land. And then here's the Gulf of Mexico. So as it comes in, it's being pushed. The onshore flow, remember the hurricane's coming in with counterclockwise winds, and it's pushing the Gulf of Mexico on top of that land, and they become one. And it lasts for hours. And in this case, because we're talking about a catastrophic, strong Category 4, it will be hours and if not days for all of that water to recede. The other downside to this is on the backside. So Galveston Bay is going to get the flow coming around because remember counterclockwise, so it's going to push the water from Galveston Bay back over to the beaches there along the coast in Texas. So it's their surge is going to be anywhere from 6 to 9 feet. Again, very dangerous, but it all depends on where a storm comes in, and that will indicate how high the surge is. The stronger the storm, there's a formula that the Hurricane Center uses. So the lower the pressure correlates to the wind around the center of circulation, and that level of circulation dictates how much push you can get in the atmosphere or in the ocean, that can push that wall of water on. So larger storm, larger, more powerful impacts, the more water it can push onto land and create a larger storm surge. So weaker hurricanes have lower storm surges, higher hurricanes have higher storm surges, or stronger hurricanes have stronger storm surges. So the National Hurricane Center, when this became a strong Cat 4, upped the storm surge for that area near Lake Charles down to just to the west of Morgan City of 15 to 20 feet. Most of the estimates are calling for 15 to 18 feet. But again, life-threatening. The storm surge with Michael was 18 feet, and I talked to a survivor who evacuated. He was not in his home. He went back to his home, 2-story, and he remembers, and I remember very vividly, he said, he couldn't believe how high the winds, how bad the winds were, but how high the water had gotten. Because remember, the ocean has a bunch of junk in it. It has debris, it has litter, it has, water bottles, all kinds of junk that gets pushed into these inland areas. And so he looked up at his second story and saw all this debris from that 18-foot storm surge. So your brain has a hard time conceptualizing the impacts because it's such an unusual event. But that's why we are so serious in our wording and in our forecasting, because again, this is really, really dangerous, life-threatening surges. 10 to 15 feet on the east side of that major, where the eye is expected to come in, again, exponentially will decrease. 4 to 7 feet around the boot of Louisiana, and then about 1 to 3 as we head over towards Mississippi. So big chunks of real estate with large storm surges will be a factor for hours. And because it's going to be such a powerful hurricane, it will take a long time for that to go. And I apologize, I've got the wrong banner on this, but this is a good storm surge graphic. So you can see the normal seasonal sea level. We talked again of the water rise as this hurricane is pushing, literally like a giant bulldozer pushing all this water on shore. So as we get into Cat 1s and Cat 2s, their storm surge 3 to 6 feet. As you get into Cat 3s and Cat 4s, we're talking storm surge of 12 feet. You can see the house there already underwater, would be technically underwater in a 2-story house. And then a Cat 4, Cat 5, 15 to 20 foot storm surge on top of that. A quick look at the storm product here. I'm going to toss it back to Steph to take a look at the radar. This is showing the wind gusts. So I wanted to show you this because look at the entire state of Louisiana is going to have winds in excess of, this particular legend says 60 miles an hour, but it's really going to be more like 80, 90, 100 miles an hour. So that area in magenta will all be feeling those hurricane force winds for at least 12 to 24 hours, depending on how fast it moves. It's going to rapidly deteriorate. But remember, it's coming in as a 4, and it's going to take some time to get down to a 1 and then into a tropical storm and then depression after that. So it's going to hold together for quite a while. We're still going to be talking about it tomorrow night. Stefanie will be in tracking it tomorrow night for you. And then as we head into Friday morning, yet again, here I've put some numbers on. This is guidance. So the winds could be in Little Rock, Arkansas in the neighborhood of 48 miles per hour. And then I think that might even be a little bit underdone. And then we'll start to see a rapid decrease once it starts to get into the Tennessee River Valley and then head over towards the mid-Atlantic after that. But still going to be something that we'll talk about through this weekend and into next week. Here's the wind radar product. And boy, I needed to switch it. So I'm going to manually drag it up here, because it gets updated with every big update, and I forgot to update this map, so I apologize. But there you can see, where the winds are. So the hurricane force winds, and they will be again in the neighborhood of 100 miles an hour or 90, 89 miles per hour in that neighborhood for Shreveport. Then up to tropical storm strength 57 to 73, and then minimal up to minimal tropical storm at 39 to 57. 57 would be a healthy tropical storm, but 39 is the minimum threshold. So large chunks of this area will be feeling those winds. Let me drag this back up because I needed to change my camera view. And again, even Little Rock still going to be feeling some of these tropical storm force winds as well. And then I'll just do one more. And you can see as we get further out in time, the wind field obviously decreases because the storm itself is weakening, but still going to be impacting with these sustained tropical storm force winds through Friday and maybe even into Saturday. We'll have to see, and then it's going to rapidly deteriorate after that. Okay, I'm going to pitch it back over to Stefanie, and she's going to take us back and show us what's been going on in the app. There's so many great features to use, and Stefanie's been doing a great job showing us velocity and wind layer and our per station. What you got for us now, Steph?
Well, something to tag on to what you were saying, we have seen a silver lining in this forecast as we've progressively seen these updates come out. Earlier, when we had the last, before this 11 o'clock Eastern full advisory, we had an 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern time intermediate advisory, and before that, a 5, which had this storm inland still maintaining its major Category 3 or more Category 3 standing. And as of the 11 p.m. advisory, we have seen that come down just a little bit. So it looks like, as you just showed, those examples of wind gusts that are likely to still occur as the remnants of Laura move onshore and move through the Midwest. Thankfully, that has come down just a little bit. Still some intense storms that folks here across Texarkana, across into Missouri could see with what's left of Laura making its way on land. But on the radar, I have here our hurricane tracker, and you can see as this thing begins to move inside, heading into the next 24 hours or so, we could see these conditions dropping below major hurricane status and then going along that track, moving on through parts of Arkansas, and then moving towards the northeastern corner of Arkansas where it meets Missouri. Over here, as we head into the end of the week on Friday, these things start to cross the Mississippi, and we'll see those storms trek along with it. And as you mentioned, Leslie, then heading out towards the mid-Atlantic states and off the coast of New England there. So something to still watch, and we'll be with you here all weekend. You notice all these little radar sites here on the app that I'm scrolling around here. I'm going to take the hurricane tracker off here so we can see a little more clearly. I've got the Lake Charles radar up, which I'm not sure how much longer we we will have this, because as you can see, the eye of this storm is just about due south of this radar site, and with some of those intense conditions within the eye wall, we could see some damage and potentially lose this radar here at the National Weather Service office in Lake Charles, but hopefully that won't be the case. We'll be able to track the data on it. But yeah, the eye wall is pretty thick here. It's got some hefty thunderstorms noted by that red color that you see there on the app, and we still have this pretty well-defined eye continuing to move on. And as I move away from this app, you could see from this radar site, excuse me, we can start to see some of that banding showing up further inland. So folks in Alexandria, Louisiana, up by Natchitoches, we're starting to see those bands and those rain showers begin to trickle in, and then of course we'll see the intensity ramp up a bit heading into the next several hours as Laura makes its way onshore. So now I'm going to switch away from our per station radar feature and go back to our high definition radar, or zooming in here just to get a bigger picture of the storm's banding. You'll see we've got about 4 distinct bands here moving onshore, and we've seen a number of repetitive storms over what I call the toe of Louisiana. I like to describe the state shape as a boot. I feel like that's probably a pretty common thing, and we've seen some bands here causing issues for folks in southeastern Louisiana in terms of a few spin-up tornadoes. A number of tornado warnings have been issued here. We talked about the rotation at the top of this live stream that we could identify on radar. So this is definitely a threat for folks who are not near the immediate path. And I know even going further east, we've had a few showers in the panhandle of Florida, Alabama, and the panhandle of Mississippi. Throughout the evening, you can see showers off the coast of Florida, kind of taking advantage of that environment from Laura, even though it's so far removed from the center. Enough moisture being lofted here into the atmosphere that as these boundaries kind of collide with the extreme outer periphery of Laura, we're getting heavy downpours there, and this may trek across parts of Apalachicola, perhaps Panama City, getting some showers here tonight that could be heavy at times. But the surf all along the Gulf of Mexico basin has been very intense here, not only from when Marco was making its way through and eventually dissipating, but as Laura has entered the Gulf of Mexico here, things shaking up. We showed you our partner cameras with Surfline, just showing the conditions deteriorating here over the weekend. And something that you mentioned, Leslie, with the storm surge, showing how conditions would be down by Rockport. That's just north of the Corpus Christi area, going up by Port Aransas. That's a place that saw a landfall from Harvey back in 2017 as a Category 4 hurricane, a very strong storm, and then it rode its way up the coastline. So folks there are probably pretty familiar with the conditions that folks are going to be dealing with now from Laura for their neighbors just up to the northeast. So it's going to be a long night here, even as the storm continues to make its way onshore. And you can track it with us here in the app and kind of catch yourself up to date on what's going with this as we bring it to you. And it'd be a great time if anybody's got any questions on what we're seeing with the radar. We have our streams up and we'd love to answer them for you. But Leslie, I think you had some interesting video that we got in from Aaron that you wanted to share with us. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. There was Aaron had a couple hours earlier today, as you know, before he got into full-on chaser mode. So we have 2 pieces of video. The first one that we're going to show you is some drone video from Aaron, and this is looking east towards Lake Charles. And of course, I believe he shot this right around 12 o'clock local time, or in that neighborhood, so 12 noon. So, early in the day, before there was a lot of these stronger winds and the direct impacts from the hurricane, but you can certainly see that there was clouds already moving the area, and there was also plenty of rain that has been in the area. As Stefanie mentioned, Aaron was actually caught in one of those feeder bands about within this broadcast, within this last hour. So that's going to, of course, only exponentially get worse when some of these stronger bands rotate over the Lake Charles Sulphur area. And then we also have some video from one of the hurricane hunters, Astro Nick. He is such a great follow. If you guys geek out on this stuff and you really like to chase hurricanes, check out this video that he shot earlier today. So they flew about 5 recon missions inside of Laura earlier today, and this is one of the videos that Nick put on his Twitter page. He's really great about sharing content with the local media, or media in general, and so it was just great to see this. And also, if you can, Matt, show the other video that he has, and they nicknamed their planes, and this particular particular plane is called Kermit. So Kermit has flown those 5 missions, and if you read his Twitter account, I knew the missions were called penetration when they penetrate a storm, but I did not know, and Steph, you probably knew this, but they call them pennies for short when they get inside these storms and do a full flight and do the the formation and go around all the quadrants of the hurricane. They call them pennies. So there was 5 pennies. I learned that today from Astro Nick. So really cool to know that the penetration name is not nearly as fun to say as penny. So really neat stuff to see. And Matt, if you want to take it back to the radar one more time, we'll take a look at this, and then we'll probably wrap it up here for this one here shortly. I did want to mention, by the way, while Stefanie was talking, I did a quick look at the National Hurricanes updates, and of course we are getting them hourly now from the Hurricane Center. So technically, we're about 45 miles south of Lake Charles, so very close to the center of circulation, getting onshore, as we mentioned, within these next couple of hours. So I'll zoom in pretty tightly here, and Stefanie's been showing it in the app, and this is just, of course, another vantage point, another tool that we can use. And again, we're starting to see it oh so close. I mean, look at this. I'm actually going to get really far in, really close. Let me get it even a little closer so we can see the topography there of Louisiana. So you know this, but I'm going to point it out to you anyways. Let me grab a color. So here is the outer. Yes. Yep. Wait, let me pick another color because I picked yellow, and that's clearly not a good color. So here's the outer northern eye wall, and then there is land right there. So even if, and again, this is rudimentary, you guys, this is not exact science, but just trying to grab my pointer and drag here, we're 10 miles away, but we have to actually have it cross the center of circulation, which is down in here, and I didn't even quite get that correctly. So again, rudimentary, this is not exact, but anywhere in the neighborhood of 24, 25 miles from that center. I think the official call from the Hurricane Center is going to be around 40 miles south of Lake Charles. We'll see, they'll give us an update here in about 12 minutes, but very, very close. And that is where, of course, the absolute worst, most dangerous, most intense winds from Laura will start to be known across Louisiana's coast, because once that center comes in, it is coming in with a fury. Category 4s are extremely dangerous, and there is not much separation between a 4 and a 5. I have covered many 5s, not many, but because they're not all that common, thankfully, but I've covered several 5 storm damage, and I've covered several 4s. The storm damage from a 5 does look different. I will say, when you're talking about a top end 5 with Michael, Dorian, it looks like a bulldozer literally came through and just leveled that area wherever the landfall was. They are like giant tornadoes when they're this size, strong category 4s and weak category 5. So I always try and use that analogy, because a lot of people say, well, what's more dangerous, tornadoes or hurricanes? Well, you can't really quantify it in that way, because tornadoes are much harder to forecast because they are shorter lived events. They can develop quickly, and they can dissipate quickly. We know, and we've known about Laura for weeks, just almost, when it became a low pressure center that came off the coast of Africa. So, we've been tracking this for a long time, 10 to 12 days. I may have the days off, but for a long time we've been tracking this, and so they're not a surprise when they come to the U.S. But what does surprise people, and what surprises me, and as a forecaster, is after all the warnings and after all of the rhetoric that we tell to people for days upon days upon days of how dangerous this is, that people still don't heed the warnings, and for whatever reason they feel that they can sustain the impacts of these giant engines, these energy capsules, if you will, that just disperse this incredible amount of energy that across the land, and it's they're powerful, they're dangerous, they're deadly, all of those adjectives we hate to use, but it's what they are. It's not grandstanding. It's not theatrics. I'm telling you, no one at my radar, none of our team, it gets into the theatrics. We, call it like it is, and that's very important to me. I've never been one to try and scare people into watching, not even when I was in news and working full time. So, in news, I just don't think that that's going to help a situation. People are already nervous and are scared when you see something like this coming on shore. There's no need to scare you with big adjectives and scary scenarios, because it's scary enough. But there's cases like this where you really need to be ready for these storms. So let me show you this velocity, and then I'm going to hand it back over to Steph, and we'll wrap up after that. So it was interesting because we've been seeing this rotation, and we've actually seen some of the couplets earlier in our 9 p.m. or 10ish p.m. live update we did. I'm not sure what time it was, but I'm not seeing any of that. But I do see some markers. I think I must have the shear markers on. Let me look over here, because I see something in the eye. Yep, I have the shear tracks on. So I'll point it out to you. Let me grab this. So sometimes you can get what are called shear markers, and right here you can see those, and you can actually see what would look like a couplet that's not. But these shear markers, indicate that there is some big time turbulence going on. And we talked about in the last update the mesovortices. Sometimes you can see those on radar. I'm not in the right mode right now to really look at that, but we could see it on the GOES infrared imagery, these mesovortices. So in these real high-end Cat 4s, low Cat 5s, sometimes you can see these little brief spin-ups that will come on shore with the friction of the land and can actually create stronger or more powerful tornadoes than you would get anyways with a landfalling hurricane, an uptick of about 10% of the winds. So the math is, if a storm comes in at 150, 10% of that is 15, so it would be 165 that we could see some of these mesovortices rotate. And we saw that with Hurricane Michael. It was very evident in the debris field that I saw, that there were several areas where we had seen some of these mesovortices. It's really fascinating stuff, and the scientists that track this stuff and do all the research go back and look at the debris fields and determine, okay, this was a tornadic rotation, this was from the eye wall, all really, really cool stuff. And these mesovortices are dangerous because they're already picking up an uptick in the wind in an already powerful hurricane. So, Steph, I'm sure we'll see more tornado warnings. There was a confirmed rain-wrapped tornado, by the way, from the National Weather Service near Lake Charles, from a storm spotter that didn't cite any damage. I went in the National Weather Service chat just now, or just while you were speaking. So I'm sure we'll see more of that as we head through tonight and tomorrow.
My radar app here in our per station feature, and you can see pretty clearly this is an interesting radar feature, like you were pointing out with the shear markers. And what we can see from the per station angle is from the Lake Charles radar, it looks like we've got a green and a red eye moving in towards that dot. That's the radar center. And this feature is interesting. It's as the radar sends out a pulse and is waiting to hear back from that. If we say here, obviously personifying it, but as it sends out that pulse and is waiting to receive it back, sometimes we get these readings. That's what you see purple all around the bottom edge of your screen there, that range folding. But because of the direction of the winds, it's creating that almost double eye feature going towards the radar, where we have the winds going perpendicular to the beam. So you're actually watching that eye wall where winds are going strictly from from the east, so from the right to the left to the east. And as it crosses that parallel of the radar and nears the radar here, that's where you're seeing that feature of those two circles, a red circle on the left and a green circle on the right, heading towards the radar. So we're getting close here, guys. We're getting those readings into the radar where the eye wall is beginning to get very close to that beam and into range here. And it's interesting to see here from the radar standpoint. I hope we get to keep this radar around. I'm really optimistic, hoping that it doesn't get taken out when this eye wall comes ashore, because that could very well happen here. But interesting to know, this eye still keeping a very, very symmetrical shape here as it approaches the shore here. So we do expect to see some pretty devastating damage once this particular band, the eye wall, comes ashore. And as you mentioned, some very strong winds being reported here. Once again, look behind me and check out some of the gusts that are anticipated in this eye wall. Maximum sustained wind, so not a gust, a steady wind of at least 150 miles per hour, gusting a bit higher depending on the location in relation to this eye wall. So something that's very, very interesting and maybe a bit intimidating to watch as this storm comes ashore. We're also tracking some of these stronger bands moving to the northeast of the circulation here. So as we head in through Lake Arthur and head further east down 10, we've got these bright reds within the band. So it shows us we've got some stronger thunderstorms that are beginning to roll on through portions of Louisiana. And as we go a little bit further west, Beaumont, you're starting to get some rain in through here, probably getting pretty gusty. Doesn't look like we have nearly the intensity that we're seeing on the other side of the storm. That's somewhat to be expected. That front right quadrant, or now since this storm is heading about due north, that northeast quadrant of the circular storm tends to be what we call the dirty quadrant. That's generally where we see the most severe weather outside of what we expect within the eye wall. So folks along the boot of Louisiana, you're in for quite the number of storms as these bands continue to wrap in. Even if you're not quite as close to the center, we could get some very beefy storms, I'll call them, moving on through here. But Leslie, to your point about some of the damage, you've covered a lot of these storms here in your experience and seen some of the damage. And I myself, time after these storms pass, you can still see the damage. If you head down I-10 today and start moving in towards Mexico Beach or Panama City Beach, you will still see trees down, though Michael moved through over a year ago, 2 years ago. So, you know, we're starting to see that this storm is going to be on par with the likeliness of those systems. I also got a chance to visit Corpus Christi and eventually going out to Rockport, where Harvey went through. And it's amazing the resilience in these communities as they rebuild and clean up after these storms go through. But it's telling when you see the damage afterwards, just the force of nature that comes out of these massive systems. And we've seen very strong language coming out in these NHC discussions with every update. And like you said, we're going to be seeing hourly updates at this point until we get to landfall. We're not far away from it now. Of course, we have to wait for the center of that circulation, so the middle of the eye, to come on shore before they're going to call this here. But we're here in the final approach, so to speak, as this storm comes on through. So, Leslie, it's going to be a long night to see exactly what we get from Laura's approach here onto land.
Yeah, you know, and I know people know that, and you and I and Mike discussed this earlier. The folks that live here, hopefully there's not many people around. I'm going to keep this up for just 2 more minutes, Stefanie, because I actually do want to see that the 1 a.m. update from National Hurricane Center. So we'll just keep this up for a couple more minutes. But I'm way zoomed in here. You can see how close this is to Cameron, Louisiana, and I couldn't add the city on there, but it's just south of Lake Charles and a little bit towards the west. So it looks like Cameron is going to be the ground zero. I hate to use that term, but that really is kind of what this is going to be. And then Lake Charles will be, again, on that northeastern dirty side that Stefanie has talked about, where there will be the worst impacts. I can tell you that I read on the chat from the National Weather Service that there was a wind gust around 101 from the weather flow center in Cameron. So we're already almost there, you guys, 101, and that's just in a gust. So we're just super, super close to starting to feel some of the worst impacts from Laura here. And let me put on the query and see if I can pick up some of the data here. So the rain rate for this particular band is about 1.25 inches, but remember that's I'm just toggling on some random areas. This one's just under 3/4 of an inch, and then we'll go back over here and we'll take it kind of do sampling, so 1 inch an hour. But remember, some of these bands that are further in the Gulf here that I'm so zoomed in you can't really see, those have the potential to put down 2 to 3 inches of rain in an hour. So that is really another concern. Even though this is moving quickly, these are huge buckets, or, you know, I hate to use the word trough because it's not a trough, but like a watering trough. These huge clouds that are just pregnant with storm liquid, which is rain, that has to get dumped somewhere, and they dump this rain so incredibly faster, so much faster than you would from a summer garden variety storm that you would get in your backyard on a summer afternoon. These are tropical downpours. They are fast. They put down heavy rain rates in short periods of time. Even in a fast-moving storm, the rain rates are going to be a little less, but they're still going to be impressive. So we are going to be switching gears also later tonight, especially when Mike Linden comes in tomorrow morning. The flooding risk will start to become a major problem. We're still going to be talking about tornadoes. I still think that's going to be a major problem. There's always a tornado risk. And let me pop over here and let's do a quick update. And okay, so I do have the 1 a.m. update. So the northern eye wall, I'm going to just read it to you guys. Northern eye wall of Laura moving over Cameron Parish. Catastrophic storm surge, extreme winds, and flash flooding occurring in southwestern Louisiana. So the official, and actually we did a pretty good job with our pointer. It's about 40 miles south of Lake Charles, which we estimated when we did our measurement. And it's about 45 miles southeast of Port Arthur. But south of that, on the coast is Cameron. So, the official call city might be Cameron because that's where the center of that circulation is going to cross over first before it heads into Lake Charles. So we'll see what the Hurricane Center says. So do the math. It's moving northwest at 15. So that's about under 3 hours, about 2.5 hours before an official landfall. So that would be in the neighborhood of 3:30 a.m. probably. I still think it might scoot in there a little bit quicker than that. We'll see. The forward movement from the Hurricane Center hasn't changed officially. It's still been northwest at 15. So at any rate, you guys, I think we're going to go ahead and take this live stream down for now. We'll take a little bit of a break. Steph and I have been doing this all afternoon, and we're going to be here with you through landfall. Then Mike will be in early tomorrow morning to pick up the coverage, talk about the severe weather threat, that this will become more of a severe weather threat. Right now, the storm surge and the wind are the headlines, the major dangerous factors from this hurricane. Tomorrow, it will still shift into a wind event, but this will become rain and severe weather event, potentially with some of these short-lived tornadoes. So Stefanie and I will be back, you guys. We'll have some more videos, and I think we have a couple more interviews. I don't remember, but we'll be back with you when we get a little closer to an official landfall. We'll take a look at the velocity products, see what we see on the radar, and see if we've got anything that we can help some family that you may have down there that did not evacuate. Hopefully they did. We certainly don't want anyone down there when we've got this kind of a storm knocking on the door of Louisiana. All right, that'll do it for now. On behalf of meteorologist Stefanie Lauber, I am meteorologist Leslie Hudson. We thank you guys so much for sticking around with us, and we'll see you here soon.